Deputy Foreign Minister Carlos Ron on Thursday urged the Trump administration to not hand over the country's embassy in Washington, D.C. to leaders of an attempted coup after U.S. law enforcement forcibly removed peace activists who had lived there since last month as guests of President Nicolas Maduro's government. The anti-media reports, an attorney for the Embassy Protection Collective, said activists were charged with interference with certain protective functions, which a State Department spokesperson confirmed to the Washington Post. The arrest came after weeks of tension between the Embassy Protection Collective and supporters of Venezuelan opposition leader Juan Guaido, who gathered outside. In January, Guaido claimed Maduro's latest election was a sham and declared himself interim president. Germany has voted to define the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement as anti-Semitic, becoming the first major European parliament to do so. The German parliament on Friday voted to accept a motion defining BDS as anti-Semitic. The motion, Resist the BDS Movement, Fighting Anti-Semitism, was sponsored by the two largest parties, Chancellor Angela Merkel's Christian Democratic Union and the Social Democrat Party, as well as the Green Party and the Free Democratic Party. The anti-media reports that on the BDS movement specifically, the motion claimed that the arguments, patterns, and methods of the BDS movement are anti-Semitic. As evidence, the motion argued that BDS don't buy stickers, which aim to identify products of Israeli origin so consumers can refrain from purchasing them, arouse associations with the Nazi slogan, "Don't buy from Jews," and are reminiscent of the most horrific phase in German history. Although the motion is non-binding, its significance, both within Germany and across Europe, is likely to be profound. The move could also pave the way for other groups to be labeled anti-Semitic for their criticism of Israel. Support for the Liberty Beat comes from the Conscious Resistance Network, featuring videos, news reports, and articles from a spiritual anarchist perspective. Experience the Conscious Resistance at theconsciousresistance.com. How would you like to have your business featured on the Liberty Beat? You can. Just send an email to libertybeat@snls.news for details. This is the Liberty Beat, produced in partnership with SNLS News and listeners like you. The Liberty Beat is online at libertybeat.news and snls.news. I'm Mick Murrow, reporting for the Liberty Beat, reminding you, spread liberty with a smile.
Hey, I'm LRN.FM Program Director Ian Freeman. If you're listening to our free-to-air satellite feed in North or Central America, heads up! We've been on the Galaxy 19 satellite since 2010. But now our satellite provider is moving LRN.FM to a new channel on a different transponder. The current channel will stay on the air until the end of May to give you time to transition without any loss of service, so don't delay. I've posted the new channel details at sat.lrn.fm, but in case you're listening with no internet access, if you do a blind scan on your receiver, you should see the new channel at transponder 6, 11.8425 GHz, horizontal polarization, symbol rate 22,000, FEC 3/4. All that information is at sat.lrn.fm, as well as a link to our Patreon, where you can support our channels for just $2 a month. Visit sat.lrn.fm for more information about our international satellite channels, and thanks for listening to LRN.fm. Some of you asked, and now we've delivered. LRN.fm's live Keene, New Hampshire studio. Hey, welcome to Freer Talk Live. We do this every now and then, usually once a week. This week, though, we did it twice because we were also, Rich Paul and I did one on Friday night. Here on internet-only platforms like DLive and Twitch, which is where you're watching us right now, if you are watching. And so, Mark, you actually called this. Let me turn off the... We're back in a moment because we're now back. You called this episode, a special episode here of Free Talk Live, because you wanted to interview Danny Ladane. And for our listeners who aren't familiar, we should already have him on the line here. Danny, are you with us? Uh-oh. I should have checked him beforehand. Danny, are you there? Drat. You know what? He's connected, so I don't know.
Shall I begin introductions?
Well, I don't know what the issue is, because Skype was working earlier today. Let's see, it's not muted. I'm going to call him right back here. So we're going to do a little tech support on the air. Let's see. I'll ask him if he could even hear us. So apologies for this. This is what happens on internet broadcasts.
Yeah, this is live stuff, right?
We're more likely to screw up. So I did some tech stuff to the computer over the weekend, and I had to go and install like an old school sound card into the computer that hasn't been supported in quite a while. It looks like the microphone is showing that it is hearing us on Skype, so maybe Danny was having some difficulty here. There's the test audio from Skype, so we know that's working.
Check the sound settings, because that happened to me this week, where I was getting the ringing noise but still couldn't hear the person. It was actually my fault, and I didn't think it was.
Okay, so Skype, one of the nice things...
Skype sucks.
Yeah, Skype generally sucks, but they do have a nice little echo test service
welcome to
here.
Skype call testing
so we'll just
service.
run this on
After the beep,
on the air and
please
see
record
if
a
it's working.
message. Afterwards, your message will be played back to you.
So we don't use Skype anymore during our radio show because the quality is just not as good as it used to be since Microsoft took over. It seems like they've been use Skype anymore. Yeah, okay, so it's working there. So maybe there's some sort of issue. Danny says he completed a Skype test call, so he says his mic is working. So we're going to call him back, and then maybe this will work this time. Danny?
Yeah, can you hear me?
We have you now.
All right, wonderful.
Hey, welcome back. For listeners who are unfamiliar, of course, longtime listeners may recall you are the producer of Playing Columbine, which was a documentary film that you made about the Columbine killers down. God, when did you make that? Like 2005, 2006?
6 or 7.
It's been a long time. Are you still there? Oh, it says reconnecting. There's a poor network connection. That's probably what caused our issues previously.
Any chance it's some kind of upload on our side? Or?
No, I don't think so.
Okay.
So what we could do is we can have him call us on the old phone lines.
Yep, that's another possibility.
Let's see. 603-283-6160. We'll get you on here. That is a way you can call in. Now, if we're going to put Danny on the phones, that means you can actually call in two ways. So if he's on Skype, then you couldn't call on Discord to ask any questions. If he's calling us on the phone, then you can call on both Discord and on the phone, and we can take your calls if you want to ask him a question. The whole point of this interview, when it happens, is going to be talking to Danny about him no longer being a libertarian. See, I didn't ever know he was a libertarian, and I'll say this to him when he calls back. He's going to call the phone lines here, but I just figured he was a lefty film producer who wanted to interview a couple of libertarians. But Mark, you're saying that you believe he used to be libertarian?
He was a Ron Paul supporter.
Oh, was he?
And claimed to have pretty strong Second Amendment beliefs. So, yeah, I believe he was. I mean, perhaps not the libertarian by the standards that you like to call them, but by what normal people would call a libertarian, yeah.
Gotcha. So I've given him the phone numbers here into the studio, and yeah, he says he's doing a speed test to see if it's not on his end. I mean, it could be either one of our issues. We've got a lot of bandwidth here, but that doesn't necessarily mean that everything's working.
The internet's a funky place,
as it's supposed to. So. Yeah, so welcome to the after show, Mark. You don't do these very often.
No.
You got a family and shit.
Well, did you just cuss?
Yeah, it's the after show. You can say whatever the fuck you want to say here.
Outrageous.
Except for certain words that Twitch and DLive don't want you to say.
Different words.
Yeah, it's a different censorship here, but it is a lesser censorship on these platforms.
Not the words that you would likely use.
What?
You probably wouldn't use the words that they censor.
That they want to censor. That's correct. Yeah. Some of our callers would, and they're not allowed to do that. So.
Right. So the purpose of the interview is that, I think we've got the most morally sound, logically consistent philosophy that one can find out there.
Mm-hmm.
Now, people tend to be pretty bad at looking at their own beliefs critically.
Yes.
And the only way I'm going to find out if I'm wrong is by interviewing people who, at the very least, can understand where I'm coming from.
That helps.
And
so somebody who was a libertarian should be able to do that.
right, or
And we have him, by the way, now. Danny LaDonne, are you there on the phones? Danny? There's somebody on the phones here. Maybe it's not Danny. Hello? Somebody called in.
Let me try. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we hear you now.
Gotcha.
Okay. All right. I'm trying to use the best microphone I have, but I think it might be cutting out on me.
You're sounding fine right now, so no issues there, and we don't know
Are
what
you on the phone, or is he?
He's on the phone.
Do you use Skype to call the phone?
Yeah, no, I'm calling you from my Google Hangouts or my Google Voice account, so it's still a internet connection, but trying to make it the best I can out here because I'm traveling, so I wanted to get you what I could do. Mm-hmm.
Well, I appreciate that. And, you know, we actually had this originally scheduled for before when we tried to go to Japan, and there were some fuck-ups.
We flaked out on Danny.
That happened, so thanks for being flexible with us here.
Yeah, happy to be here. Sure.
So what I was just telling Mark was that, you know, for listeners that don't know, you're the producer of Playing Columbine, and I'm sure you've produced other things since then, but we don't necessarily know what they are because you are a filmmaker, and I know you've taught some film at some colleges, if I'm not mistaken. Can you kind of catch us up on the last decade or so since we've had you on?
Yeah, sure. So I seem to join your show every few years, and we kind of touch base. We first talked, of course, when I created a video game in 2005 about the Columbine school shooting called Super Columbine Massacre RPG. And then in 2007, I interviewed you guys for that film that I made called Playing Columbine. Mm-hmm. And we kind of stayed in touch. We debated Jack Thompson about video game violence.
Oh, wow, that's right.
Yeah,
I forgot about that asshole.
Yeah. And then in 2015, I talked to you guys about how I was banned from my former employer, my campus, Adams State University.
That's right.
I ended up suing the school through the ACLU of Colorado. They represented me in a lawsuit.
Did you win?
And we were able to settle the case. They paid us $100,000, and they lifted the ban on the totally warrantless and without due process measure to remove me from campus because I was publishing information critical of the school at watchingadams.org. So that was the last time we spoke.
Right on. How much did the attorneys take of the $100,000?
The standard cut, they got 35%, and I got 65%.
That's not bad. That helps pay the school loans off, I imagine.
Yeah, and I was happy to donate to the ACLU because they offered, pro bono legal services. And
they do good work.
I think we did amazing work together, and I was really happy with them. So, long story short, because of that and at least one other lawsuit I've been a part of to preserve public lands here in the San Luis Valley for agriculture called Keep Polston Public, I've decided to go to law school. So starting this fall, I will be starting law school.
Cool. What area of law are you planning on looking at or studying?
Yeah, I'm interested in intellectual property, technology, and media communication law. The areas that have kind of interested me as a media maker myself. Mm-hmm. So that's the direction that I want to pursue.
So what I was telling Mark earlier was I never knew that you had ever described as a libertarian, and Mark insists that you had.
Well, I'm not sure that he described that way, but I'm saying what I'm claiming is that he was a Ron Paul supporter, and that he had similar ideas on the Second Amendment. So,
is that all true, Danny?
Yeah, I actually kind of put together a brief timeline. The first election I voted in was in the year 2000, which was a disaster, as we all remember, right? The Bush v. Gore decision, all of that, the hanging chads.
Yes, that's the one.
I actually voted for the Libertarian candidate, Harry Brown, in that election.
Me too.
Yeah.
There's never been a good Libertarian candidate since Harry Brown.
And in the decade to follow, I voted for John Kerry. I voted for Barack Obama. But then by 2012, I felt like Obama had let me down on a number of really key issues for me, including, of course, military and the wars that were still ongoing. Mm-hmm. So I did register as a Republican in 2012 so that I could caucus for Ron Paul in the 2012 election. Yeah. And then in 2016, I was a Bernie Sanders supporter, but I held my nose and voted for Hillary Clinton.
My God.
Well, what are you going to do? I mean,
I don't think what did I do? Vote for Darryl Perry in that election, I think?
Right. Well, I mean, it's not like there were a bunch of choices that were out there, and I don't tend to hold people's feet to the fire on their presidential choices. statistically, your chances of winning, your vote mattering in that election are very, very low. So if you choose to vote for Donald Duck, then fine. If you choose to vote for the lesser of two evils because you think the other one is a terrible choice, and
Vermin Supreme.
whatever, Vermin Supreme's a fine choice if you want to write him in. But having traded off my votes in the past to get somebody to vote for down ticket folks, I don't, you're not going to find me scolding anyone.
Yeah, no, absolutely not. So, I mean, would you say you were a libertarian at some point in the past?
I think a lowercase L libertarian would describe me. I was never registered with the Libertarian Party, although
Gotcha.
I liked aspects of Gary Johnson and all that. But yeah, I think lowercase libertarian or classical liberalism were interesting ideas to me for quite a while, and in some ways still are. I'm not going to say they aren't.
Did that change for you in some way, though?
Yeah,
And if so, how?
so I kind of tried to figure out how this happened. I mean, it started with me, I made a controversial video game, and so I was thrust into the debate about free speech and the First Amendment. And so there were a lot of positions about, legalizing drug use, sex work, all the things that I think consenting adults should be able to do. I still believe those things. For sure. And then, of course, we had the financial crisis of 2008, and so issues like, hard currencies and the critique of fiat money, those things really resonated with me, certainly. And so that was kind of how the evolution started. But I think I just had a difficult time when I would go out and make what I thought were strong libertarian arguments. I sometimes had a difficult time actually generating examples of where I thought the ideas that I was championing were succeeding.
Yeah.
And I also, I came upon some pretty difficult questions like, well, I'm a product of the public school system. I was teaching at a state university at the time. And there are a lot of things that I think that the state can actually do fairly well. I think it could do them better. But I looked at the alternative and I thought, well, what would this kind of minarchist society or this society of, completely voluntary exchanges look like? And it was really difficult to conceive at any grand scale. It might work in a very small situation, but that always seemed to be nested within a larger structure where the court system would be enforced, where the police or the fire department would show up, where you could get an ambulance to a hospital and receive care regardless of your ability to pay. Those were the kinds of things that I ran into when I was caucusing for Ron Paul and trying to convince more of my left-leaning friends that Ron Paul had a lot of great ideas. And I think he did have some good ideas. But there were some other sticking points that, that was a little difficult to defend.
So, I would say that if you have a difficult time defending a particular issue, then you probably should be prepared to change your mind. However, when I think about, government school, for instance, I think, for one, you were working at a university, right? So you're boiling away in a godless commie cauldron, right? And that makes it difficult to. I mean, if you don't have other people around you that believe like you believe, it's really hard to hold on to those opinions. But if
I could just point out very quickly, Mark, that unfortunately higher education in the United States is really moving in the opposite direction of communism because students are actually burdened with more and more of the tuition dollars that they pay.
Yes.
And we can talk about that in detail, but
I want to talk about
I'm just going to take issue with the idea that we were living in this communist utopia in the ivory tower.
Well, I mean, would you agree that most, many, all, or very few of, you tell me, how many of your professors that you spoke to on a regular basis would have had similar ideas to you, and how many were just sort of, lefty liberals?
I mean, I have no problem stating that most faculty in higher education are left-leaning, democratic, progressive people. That's not really up for debate. Unless you go in the school of business where you find most of the Republicans or most of the conservatives, most people in higher ed are liberal. And there are a lot of reasons why. We could talk about why you start out as liberal so you like more education, or you get more education so you become more liberal. It's kind of a feedback loop. But yeah, I agree with that.
So I think that, for one, let me give a little here first, because I think it's important to do so. I think that this modern generation of college-going, people, probably the ones that have already graduated and are sitting out there with tens of thousands of dollars of debt and useless degrees.
$100,000, sometimes
Right.
more. Yeah.
Right, $100,000. So let's use that number. It's nice and round. $100,000 in debt on a degree that they're not going to use should probably be offered a bailout in the same way that banks that were responsible for an economic meltdown, 2006, 7, 8, wherever you want to call it, and the resulting real estate crisis and all that stuff, they got bailed out because they were too important. I'd say our future's important, and to throw millennials out with the babies out with the bathwater because we sold them a bill of goods that a communications degree for $100,000 was a good idea, that somehow they've just got to live with that. These are young people and they're impressionable, and you take them and you throw them in a state system where they're told over and over and over and over again that if you want to be successful, you have to go to college, and then in order to get to college, they have to sign their on a dotted line. These are people not old enough to drink, according to the government, that they can then take out $100,000 in debt that they don't really see the future of having to pay. Yeah, those people, I think, need a bailout from the government, and that's because the government did a bad thing to them in the first place. However,
I think at least some of that is certainly true. I mean, we're right now on the weekend that a very wealthy billionaire spoke at Morehouse College, I believe, and he announced that he was going to pay for all the debt of that year's graduating class.
Impressive.
Which was a very nice thing for a private wealthy billionaire to do, but I think it left most of us scratching our heads as to why we're wanting the billionaires to save us rather than trying to develop a system that could actually equitably hand education to people without a mountain of debt like our parents or grandparents could have done.
Yeah, let's steal the money from
do.
the billionaires rather than having them give it up voluntarily.
Well, we have to ask how they got those billions, Mark, but we can talk about that.
It's a great question. So let me first make my statement about education. Okay, I would say this. Some rich people got their money through graft and corruption and things like that. Those people I don't support in any way. Some got their money by, making deals that people wanted and, making people's lives better. Steve Jobs, this guy who, provided an iPhone to so many people. Awesome guy, did awesome things. Probably wasn't involved in the government much at all. However, Elon Musk, for instance, hasn't seen a government contract that he didn't love. Not so much. Anyway, as far as the government school system goes, I mean, public education, we can see, is demonstrably not as good as private education, right?
I don't think that's actually true.
Okay.
And we can talk about why that is.
Let's do that.
Think, there's a lot of evidence to suggest that private schools have the luxury of choosing their students, and so they have outcomes that are superior in part because they pick students that are already in better situations to begin with.
Yeah, like situations like wanting to go to school. Right?
I mean, we can talk about what it means to want to go to school and why, and the model under which we develop that. But, we've looked a lot at things like charter and magnet schools and what they do well, what they don't do well. There really isn't a magic bullet. It's not like every charter school is fantastic and every public school is terrible.
Well, what about this statement? What about this
ahead.
statement? That for the grade and for the jurisdiction, whatever the jurisdiction is that school applies to, all the schools in that 99% of the worst schools in America for a given grade and for a given jurisdiction are government-run schools. I'm not talking about charter schools. I'm talking about government-run schools. And that's not a statistic. That's me making crap up as I go.
Yeah. So I will tell you I'm comfortable with that characterization, though we can disagree on the math.
Okay.
And I'll tell you that the reason for that is because, the government school is in some ways the fail-safe for all the people who couldn't afford to go to school otherwise, who 100 years ago would have gotten a fifth-grade education at best before they spent a life working in the mines or working in the factory or working on the farm. Now, I will say, as I've talked about kind of at the outset, one of the reasons I ran up against difficulties with my libertarian arguments is if you look at the best school systems in the world, none of them are run in a kind of privatized for-profit model.
Yep.
The best school systems in the world pay teachers very well. They're public schools. They invest in education. They all have a master's degree or better. I'm thinking of a country like Finland. And they have, a 10-to-1 or less student-teacher ratio so that the teacher can really individualize the learning assessments of each student. So
Well,
some of those things can be replicated in a private system, but is that private system scalable for a country of 325 million people?
Hard to say.
It hasn't really borne itself out.
Well,
Yeah.
it couldn't possibly because it's being undercut by the fact that governments steal thousands of dollars from parents, and many of them feel like they couldn't possibly afford to not only pay whatever property tax they're paying, but then on top of that also send their kids to a private school. So it's hard to say. But I do know that those people who've been to private school, a lot of them, for instance, there's one called the Sudbury system here in New England. I don't know how far across the country it's spread, but where the students actually basically run they run the school. They decide who to hire. They decide who to, as far as teachers, even the janitor. The kids make the decisions. They kind of go into a room, all ages together in the same place. It's not this sort of regimented, you must be with people your own age kind of Prussian school model system. And the kids, not kids, but the adults who've been through that system that I know just absolutely loved it, where they it was almost like unschooling, but in a schoolhouse, basically, with a bunch of other kids that were also unschooled, meaning they could kind of select their own curriculum for themselves and follow whatever their calling was, which I think that, anything that brings more freedom to education, that's what I support. That's my real objection to the government schools is, of course, the coercion that's behind them. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, I can speak on a number of levels here. First of all, I was, growing up, a gifted and talented student in a school system that was under-resourced.
Yeah.
So I didn't get the kind of education that, frankly, I could have gotten until about high school when I had some really excellent teachers and some additional resources that allowed me to go on to be a filmmaker and things like that. Let me go back just a second because I'm actually not here to defend the status quo of the American school system as such, right? So I think we can all agree that the system that we have now is certainly not ideal and it can certainly be improved. We could talk about why. I would just side with Ian quickly to say that, the government not only, quote, steals, and we can talk about what taxation as theft means, but they not only steal money from the parents, but they actually also steal money from all the non-parents who don't have kids, right? Who are part of this thing called society. And what does it mean when you don't have kids? And is it worthwhile to have your neighbor's kids go to school on at least your partial dime? But I would only circle back again to say what we understand works about education really occurs more at the classroom level and individualizing education, and really not at the level of how that school district is funded per se, because we have great public education in some parts of the country and it's poor in other parts. There are plenty of private schools, dare I say some of the for-profit higher education programs that have actually been shut down because they're so terrible.
Yes.
I mean, Trump University comes to mind, but there are many others, right?
There's a few of them out there, no doubt. You're not going to get my argument. These people offering these crap MBAs out there that take this online course and that kind of thing.
Well, there's also fly-by-night operations that will get people to join their college and then fold and just walk away with the money.
To me, the biggest problem there is the notion that a college degree is for everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And when I would say that it's not exclusive if everybody's got access to it. And
this is a bigger question. Like, what is the purpose of education? Are we vocationally training people to go out and perform a function in the marketplace?
Yep.
Are we training the future citizens to go out and run the government because they're independently thinking people who can run their own lives and critically evaluate claims that political leaders and business leaders make? I just want to make a macro point here, which is to say that one of the consistent themes we've seen, and I distinguish Republicans from libertarians on this one, the Republican Party has for decades played this game where they defund a public program or a service and then when that program is defunded, it starts to falter, it doesn't work well, and then they will say, oh, you see, the government, it just doesn't work well at anything, we should just eliminate it, right?
Yep.
It's like, well, if you look at why this is happening, it's not always like this way. Like, we used to have a highway and bridge system and infrastructure that was the envy of the world, right? It used to be something we invested in, and we used to have a fantastic infrastructure. And if you look at, like, this is what Ralph Nader says, among other people. I mean, look at who won World War II, right? The United States won World War II. Germany lost World War II. Well, look at Germany now. Look at their highway system. Look at their pension plans. Look at their education system. Look at their health care. Look at their investment in green energy technology. You'd think that they won World War II and the United States lost just by how bombed out parts of the United States look from decades of neglecting infrastructure investments.
Do you think that might be done in part by sort of a racial bias, whether people admit it or not, that, giving the government control over these aspects result today in people who are ethnically disadvantaged? And mind you, Danny, you could be ethnically disadvantaged, in the relatively near future. America's demographics are changing. But
well,
today,
all right, Mark, I just found out recently that according to Ancestry.com, I am actually a lot more Jewish than I thought. So I don't know if I'm a minority or not for that. But
what's your
am.
percentage? Mine's 10. 10 or 11.
My percentage of Judaism is around 55%.
I am. Wow, that's really good. How much Neanderthal do you have?
Oof, I don't know. I don't think it goes back that far. I am European in ancestry, but
wait a second. 23andMe? Oh yeah, you absolutely. You got to go look for your Neanderthal number. It's great.
No, he said Ancestry.
Oh,
Ancestry.
Ancestry is what I use. I'm
You
not
might
here
be
to
able to
promote
port
their
over-
specific service, but so Mark, what you were saying though is certainly worth talking about because. I mean, look, honestly, part of the problem here is that when we talk about something like education, we're talking about a system that is funded basically by your zip code and the property taxes in your zip code. So if you're from a poor community, your school is going to get less funding, and it perpetuates all those economic inequalities.
Sure.
I think the way we fund education in this country is kind of a disaster for that reason.
Well, and my question is that as we support government-funded education, we have 100 years of seeing how this is done, at least here in the United States. And I'm not saying that they can't do it better, that you can't take a sort of socialized model and make it run more efficiently. However, what I haven't seen ever is some kind of comparison between American private education and, say, the Finnish model or something like that. I'd be fascinated to be able to look at that. How does the Finnish model really take every student, shove them all together in a one-size-fits-all system, and somehow spit out these perfect students? Because I don't think it does. I mean, is it better than
part
U.S.?
Of what we're talking about right now is evaluating the criteria on which we judge education or any other commodity or any other service, which is to say, are we going to look at the individual results of the very best candidate? Then yeah, of course, a Harvard education or some other elite private institution is going to give you the very best education.
Yeah.
But is that model scalable for an entire country? Probably not. So then you have to ask yourself, well, what model is going to be available for most people so that the average working class person is now in a better standard of living than they were 100 years ago?
Well,
and the
what
fact
else is
that
working
people
class?
can go to public school, that's a part of it.
Which class is working class?
Which class is working class?
Yes.
I mean, we can talk about what you do for a living if you have a blue-collar job.
No,
We
I'm
can
talking
talk
about which quintile.
Oh, I'm using these terms with like the least economic expertise, but I'm going to talk about people who are sort of lower to lower middle class.
Okay, so the bottom two quintiles. Okay, so fine.
Sure.
I would contend that the bottom quintile isn't working class. That's a class of people that generally doesn't work much at all. But
Oh, Mark, that's not true. There are plenty of people who work 40 hours, 50, 60 hours a week and are living in functionally poverty-level wages because of the way that we pay people in this country.
So we'll move on to these numbers. I made minimum wage at one point in life. I was 15.
Yeah, I did too. I was about 16 minimum wage.
Doesn't it didn't you find it staggering and odd that people who you know what it was like to make minimum wage, that somehow people can't rise above that, whatever that is?
We could talk about why that is. When I was working minimum wage, there were plenty of people who were in their 30s, 40s, and 50s working at the same fast food restaurant that I did. And I can tell you that in the post-recession era of the United States, most of the jobs that have been created are, temporary, part-time, independent contractor, service sector jobs that pay not minimum wage, but within like $3 to $5 of minimum wage and are functionally minimum wage.
I've got a truck driver friend who sends me pictures from all over the country where he finds, people who are doing warehouse work for whatever reason. There's a lot of signs for warehouse work, and they're $17, $18, $19, $20 an hour all across the country. I mean, I'm not talking about New York City or anything like that. I can only say what I experience in my life, but and I don't know what these statistics are, but I know that people can lie with statistics. There's right now companies that are offering $20 an hour jobs in Missouri, because I just got this picture from this guy sent it to me from 2 days ago, where that's there's the heartland. There's a pay that people can, that's well above this fight for 15 thing. I don't know.
Well, if I could interject here on
ahead,
the question of, because you had talked about, what's the best system? Is this the best system? Obviously not. Do the Finns have the best system? And what is the best system? To me, it doesn't matter what the best system is if it's being forced down people's throats.
All right, let's do the taxation theft.
By the threat of violence.
You're dealing with Ian on this one.
Because I want to see people get a good education, and you're going to have a tough time, or anybody's going to have a tough time convincing me that the best education in the world could come from a centrally managed, politically oriented, violent organization. Whether it's run by Barack Obama or whether it's run by George Bush or Donald Trump, it's going to be bad. It's going to be political. They're going to shove their views, which are views that promote obedience, right? Like the government school system and even many private school systems are very top-down, very centrally managed, and very much all about this, the Prussian supposed model of education, where the kids are taught you speak when when you raise your hand, you be quiet when the lights get turned off, you move from one location to another when the bells ring, and you do what you're told and you respect authority. There was a really interesting, and I realize this is extended here, but there was an interesting conversation I had at the 420 this year out in Concord that several of us had with a school teacher who was there. A really cool lady. She was talking about how she wanted to take her high school class. She teaches at the government school there in Manchester, one of the government schools in Manchester. She wanted to take her high school class out. It was a nice day. She's a biology teacher, but she, for whatever reason, wanted to take them out to do some yoga in an area of the school that was generally unused. It was like an outside area. So she gets in her head, she wants to do this. She tries to just take the class out, but unfortunately the door is locked because, it's a prison. And so
middle-class welfare babysitting day prison.
Right. This isn't a bad school, right?
But Danny doesn't disagree with any of this.
Okay. Well, I don't know what Danny disagrees with. I'm not presuming anything. So I'm just going to finish the story.
Okay.
So she tries to take them out. The door's locked. She has to call somebody administration to explain what she wants to do, get the door unlocked. She talked to the principal about it. He authorizes it. The door gets unlocked. She goes out there and they start doing yoga. Well, as they're doing this, a vice principal of the school walks by. Of course, he has no idea what they're there for, right? One hand's not talking to the other. He just knows they're in an area they're not generally supposed to be. And so, he stops them and, asserts his authority as the co-warden of the prison that they're in, and, expresses surprise that they would be out there. And she explains, I've got permission from the warden. The principal told me that, we can be out here doing this. And he radios in and radio back. And okay, fine. So he moves along. And then somebody else comes along, some administrator of some fashion, I forget, a guidance counselor or whatever. And something similar happens there. So she's been, stopped by two other bureaucrats already, just trying to have the class outside for the day. And so then two cops come by. And one of them is the school resource officer. The other one is the former school resource officer. So the most previous one was there for that day working with the current one. And they're walking through, and then things really get interesting, because then it's, you're not supposed to be out here. Your class isn't supposed to be in this area. And she tries to explain that she has permission, and they just couldn't believe that would be the case. And they order her to go back inside. And she refuses to do what they said. And this just sets the police officer off, because teachers are supposed to model a good example for their students. When a authority figure like this person with the badge tells a teacher to do something, she should do what they're telling her to do, because it looks bad. They actually lectured her after her kids went back in the room. They lectured her about how surprised they were that you would do this. Now, she's a new teacher there. She's on her first year. And so like, oh my goodness, this teacher's stepping out of line. She's a bad example. She was talked about this later by the principal, who was also, even though he'd given her permission to be there, the principal expressed that he was upset that she would balk at what the police were telling her, that she would question what the police were telling her,
because set for the children.
Because of the example it sets for the children. This is sort of my larger point here, is that the government schools teach obedience, and I don't think that there's any government that's ever going to be formed, no matter which political party is in charge of it, regardless of the funding method. They want to teach people to not question authority, and I think that's fundamentally a problem.
I'm going to kind of take this in reverse order. Ian, I'm going to agree with you to some extent here, because I think the United States is verging on a police state, if it isn't already one.
Oh, it's already there.
I think there are a lot of ways that we can divide that up just by the number of incarcerated people we have in this country. Is one of the things we're number one in the world in, right?
Yep.
There are incidents in the United States where police fire more bullets in that one incident than entire countries' police forces fire in a year in other countries. Right, so these things are true. We know they're true. I will say that democracy is probably the worst system that we have in the world, except for all the other ones. And if
there's a strong argument that a benevolent dictator would be a better system if they, would just leave people alone.
Yeah, I mean, I think it was in Mad Magazine that the problem with socialism is that one man takes from another. And the problem with capitalism is it's the other way around.
Yeah.
So let me go back, Mark, because you talked about this $20 an hour job in the heartland, right?
Yep.
I would simply ask, without knowing more about the specific job, and maybe you don't either, does that $20 an hour job include things like health care? Because we in this country, for a number of reasons,
healthcare is ruined, and healthcare is ruined, and it was ruined by government intervention. And I don't think we can ever go back. I mean, I'm going to call it the impossible solution that medicine be provided in the marketplace, and that the same thing that has driven down the costs of elective plastic surgery, elective LASIK surgery, and elective medical. I mean, the prices have gone down and the quality's gone up of elective surgery in the United States. Yeah. Those market forces don't
Mark,
exist.
As soon as I can plan for my coronary bypass in the same way that I can plan for my breast augmentation, I think you might have a good argument there. I want to be able to talk about education and healthcare tonight.
My mom had her stent surgery done weeks in advance. She could have chosen to go someplace else, and they do have some places. I think it's Medical Center of Oklahoma City or something, where you could choose, or you can go overseas and do things significantly less costly. I'm not saying there's certainly emergency medical procedures out there, and the government ruined medicine in this country. Maybe the only solution at this point is a socialized medical system, because it's the only one that's politically expedient. But don't expect
No, it's not. Not for people that are not politically expedient to assist, not for elderly folks or tiny babies like we've seen in the UK, where they're just sentencing kids to death even though the parents want them to survive. This is some crazy shit they're doing.
Well, that's the truth, right? There will be death panels, and at that point it will be the government that has to make those decisions.
That's my point about schools, is anytime the government's in charge, whether we're talking about hospitals or we're talking about the government schools, it's a politicized institution every single time. And you talk to teachers and they'll tell you about it. How there's a political belief that is being crammed down the students' throats, let alone the fact that everybody's forced to pay for it. I don't want Trump educating my kids, and I don't want Barack Obama doing it either.
So, Mark, I think, and Ian, it's worth asking ourselves if this free market system of healthcare is so great, why we don't see it in any other country to scale. Why, if you look at the countries with the best healthcare outcomes on an average basis, if you look at, for example, the longest life expectancies in the world, you don't see it coming out of systems that are, privatized in nature. You see it from countries that invest in public healthcare and whose citizens can go in for a routine checkup without worrying about the copay or the deductible. They can catch one symptom or problem early rather than waiting until it's a much more serious problem, which is what happens in this country. I mean, in the last few years, the United States has actually increased its female mortality rate during pregnancy in maternity wards where women give birth. The United States is faltering in that way, while other countries tend to have that number going down. And for the last several years in the United States, average life expectancy has fallen because more middle-aged white men and others are kind of dying early deaths of despair with alcohol and drug abuse and things of that nature. I would say just for a second, Mark, that this $20 an hour job, et cetera, that we're talking about, those jobs are starting to go away. And if we're willing to confront an issue like automation and AI and how it's going to just totally wreck the way people like truck drivers are going to make their living in 5 or 10 years, we need to get really serious about how technology is going to fundamentally change the way a lot of us go to work.
It's worth pointing out that the medical system here is in no way free market. It is highly regulated and highly controlled.
He's got us on the ropes in the same way we had him on the ropes on the educational system. And he's right to do that because we kept hitting him on the public education system.
No, I don't think anyone is on the ropes here. You guys haven't shown me a single other country that has a privatized system at a national level that produces students who are accelerating beyond that of the students who are in a model like Finland or others.
I can't on a national level because the problem is that there are certain sort of, we'll call them memes or zeitgeist in the world, and socialism was a strong zeitgeist starting in the late 1800s on through today. The notion that the government should provide me with medical care and education and God knows what else. At some point or another, they're going to make sure that my dog's fed or whatever it is. You were just bringing up the truck drivers. Pretty soon, the idea that will go from each according to his ability to each according to his need to everybody should get a paycheck no matter what. And maybe that's the way it needs to be.
I don't want to show anybody a privatized system because I don't want a privatized system. I don't want a system. Typically, when you hear that term, it means that somebody in government awards an elite contract to somebody, some corporate fat cat in industry, like you've seen with privatized prisons or whatever, for instance, in this country. I don't want anything to be privatized. I just want to people to not be coerced, and then whatever comes out of that, I'm fine with. And I suspect it would be better than what we have. But even if you could say it wasn't, and this is a question I think, Mark, you've asked me in the past, like if the statistics showed that a government-run system was somehow better than one that was run, in the marketplace, in the free market, would I change my mind about that? And my answer, of course, is no, because I'm not okay with threatening my neighbor in order to get them to do what I think is best. How do you feel about that?
So this is one of the areas of libertarianism that I think are stronger arguments, and these are philosophical arguments. If we're talking about the non-aggression principle, if we're talking about people who just simply like, well, what if I don't want to pay for your education? Are you going to send men with guns to my house, if I refuse to pay my taxes? I understand those arguments, all right? Those are actually the things that I find appealing about libertarianism. Right. And I would say, look, if you're, and I'm not trying to demean you guys by bringing up this example, okay, but if you were a college freshman in a philosophy class and you encounter the ideas of Ayn Rand, objectivism, or things like this, that's really appealing. And so you see a real kind of outgrowth of libertarian representation demographically among younger white men, because this seems to be a sort of a set of ideas that are appealing to a certain group of people at a certain time in their life. okay? But if you have been a statistically marginalized group of people and you've never had access to those sets of resources in your collective, ancestral memory, then the notion that well, we'll just let everyone do what they want, we'll let the market decide, and if you can't eat at Woolworths because the private property owner decides they don't like people with your skin color, we'll just hope the marketplace will sufficiently punish them. And for
By
a
the way,
long time in the
Woolworths is
South,
huge
that
in
did not
Mexico.
work.
I just want to say Woolworths still exists. It's huge in Mexico.
Yeah.
And they'd still have lunch counters.
Yeah.
So what I would say in that circumstance is that there's no doubt that discrimination existed in the United States, and I don't like it one way or the other. When it comes down, I don't want to see discrimination on any level, but I do think that people should be able to determine who they're going to do business with, because otherwise all you're doing is driving underground the discrimination.
I think I know your answer to this, Mark, but if your job is working in the county clerk's office and a gay couple comes in wanting a marriage certificate, and you say, well, I'm not going to issue one because of my religious beliefs, like this woman who did that, right? Well,
Yep.
she's in a government job. She's
Yep.
supposed to perform a state function. She refuses to, citing these beliefs. I mean, this is serious. You could be a pharmacist and refuse to, prescribe birth control or, a morning after pill. You could be a doctor who refuses to, operate on a baby of a same-sex couple or something. These are real problems.
If she refunds my last 5 years worth of tax payments to her rapacious and violent organization, then absolutely turn me away. And
Okay, Mark, but we know it's not going to work that way.
No, it's not. And this is the point that I'd like to make to you, Danny, is that government, people in power, people who are rich have always been able to buy or be the people in power. Right?
Agreed.
9,000 years. And never in the course of human history, you were saying, well, where is this place where medicine works, blah, blah, blah. Well, tell me the place, and you can use time, whatever, where the poor and the powerless have ever ruled anything, themselves, anything. They never get a chance to, because the rich and powerful will always have the reins of power. So when you're talking about
I want to answer your hypothetical.
I will.
You've asked me a question.
Hold on. Wait. I want to finish I got a last little point here. So when we talk about ethnically disadvantaged people who want to see justice done through the state, those people are living a fucking dream. They think that the only thing they can ever hope for is to outbreed the ethnically advantaged people and then take over and do the same goddamn shit to them. That's
Mark,
the only hope they have.
I don't know if you slept through the 2018 midterms, but we saw more women of color elected to office in Congress than we've ever seen in history. And these people are taking positions that we just, fundamentally haven't heard. We now have 2 Muslim women of color in Congress. I find it ironic that all the people who were lecturing us about political correctness and complaining about it are the people who are the most upset when the 2 first Muslim women of color say anything. In Congress these days. Right,
those ladies can't say anything.
Let me go back to the question you asked, because the answer to your question is the 20th century in the United States, thanks to things like the New Deal, thanks to things like progressive taxation, has seen the emergence of a middle class that just did not exist before. Now, I will not say that is only government policies, of course, because there were many innovations in the marketplace, in the regulated marketplace, that were actually also a part of that system.
I'll add something to that.
The only way that we can have any collective power is through some democratic system whereby the people can represent one another and their interests, and they can unionize, and they can collectively bargain, and they can join together so that the financial elites don't own everything, and we don't live in some kind of serfdom where might makes right and the ruling class decides everything for everyone. I
think collective bargaining in the private sector it appears to be dead. If it's not, it's on life support.
Because we have all these right to work for less states.
Well, I mean, are you going to tell somebody that they have to pay union dues in order to work in a particular sector? I mean, that's...
Well, I will say that if they're working in a union sector labor market and they're enjoying all of the benefits that union due-paying members have earned, then they're kind of free riders. They're kind of free riders if they're enjoying all the benefits, but they're not chipping in to make those benefits possible. That seems like a problem.
Is all you have to do is read the news stories about how the union thugs will go in and harm people that choose to work for less in certain circumstances.
I'm not going to defend that behavior. Yeah,
it just sounds like another government to me.
I wouldn't defend it when the private owners of a coal company or a coal town or something hire all of the private security to beat down the union workers either. So we can agree that violence is wrong. Okay.
Right. But I'm just saying that for unions to work, it appears to need to have a certain amount of force that's necessary to get people on board and give up an amount of their check.
Well, you're just saying that's the way it appears, but there's nothing wrong with the idea of people collectively bargaining to benefit. But once you bring in the threat of force against those who don't want to go along with whatever the bargaining agreement is, then there's a problem. Now you're just talking about creating another government.
Okay, so I want to bring up this point, Danny, and this is something that never gets looked at when people say the middle class emerged in the United States. When Republicans say they want to go back to a simpler time, they almost always will be referring to the 1950s when black people had to ride the back of the bus and a whole bunch of other things.
Or the 1850s. Some of them like the 1850s more.
I like the 1870s, if I may, but it's certainly not about the subjugation of ethnic groups. It's more about...
You would not like the dental care of the 1870s.
I will give you that, but I certainly did like the idea that in a 12-year period, personal income doubled for the average working American, and you just don't see anything like that in any other time frame. But this is an important factor. In the 1950s, when both Democrats and Republicans always want to go back to this magic decade, and I think it's because of the Happy Day 1970s and 80s Happy Days TV show.
It's magic for white people, Mark.
It is. But this 1950s time frame was right after every industrialized nation had been bombed to hell, and there was no one to compete. So, of course, skilled labor...
Yeah, that helped.
It's a big factor.
That helped, but you know what else helped? The GI Bill helped. Getting a generation of people who hadn't gone to college before to go to college and then investing heavily in science, technology, and medicine, those things also really helped.
Science, technology, and medicine are great places, and I recommend people who want to pursue careers in that do so. It's the vast majority of college degrees, especially the ones in I always go after communications because I'm in radio, and neither one of us has a communications degree, and we're some of the last people that are probably going to make a paycheck in this realm.
I'd just like to encourage any young people listening who want to better their lives, do not join the military, do not die for politicians, even though it might mean you might get sent to college, even though I've heard they've screwed people over on that deal in a lot of cases.
Yeah, well, and that's part of the problem, isn't it? We have a generation of people who can only afford to ascend any kind of prospect for a better life by going to college because there is some government military program that allows them to do that. If we just invested in public college on the front end, like we did a generation ago, you could work a summer job to get into college, and you wouldn't have to go halfway around the world to die for people that don't want you in their country in order to get a college degree here.
Don't you think that the college bubble was created by easy government loan money? That colleges are seeing that people can sign their name on a dotted line instead of writing a check?
I've thought and read a lot about this issue, Mark, and
yes.
I think that is certainly one component. I think, frankly, the private lending institutions that got involved in higher education and created a system of lending standards that would be the envy of every mafia in the world, that even in bankruptcy, you can't discharge your student loans. I mean, that's insane, and we shouldn't have had that. And we shouldn't have the rates that we have on interest for student loan repayments if this is supposed to be an investment in the next generation instead of making them indebted, right?
I'm ignorant on college loans and all that. I went to 2 years of associates in community college.
And you paid for it with your Kmart paycheck.
Well, no, I didn't actually. It was the government paid for it
that's
through
right. You had
Bright Futures.
The
I think
Florida Academic Scholarship,
what they call, which did come out of my paycheck ultimately, and it came out of a lot of people's paychecks. But doesn't the government hand out college loans? I thought it was like Fannie Mae or Freddie Mac or one of those things.
Yeah, those are servicers of those loans, and we can talk a lot about, and this is the whole debate we're having now about what is socialism, right? So if you
Right, I don't even know.
If you have public-private partnerships where the government ensures that everyone has health care, but they're still paying companies and individual doctors in a free market system, is that really socialism? Is it democratic socialism? Is
it ain't a free market,
democracy?
whatever it is. If it's a system with the government involved, it's not free.
We've never had a free market. I mean, that doesn't exist as a concept. We'd like to think of something as a free market, but the only kind of marketplace we've ever had is some degree or another of regulation.
Yeah, you can compare markets. You can compare,
like
how industries are in markets that are more or less regulated. And of course, you can look at, Mark, you gave a few examples within healthcare of, the elective surgeries like LASIK, which don't have near as many regulations upon them, and so you see the prices going down, you see more robust competition, you see quality going up. You can look at the computer business, for instance, also very lowly regulated. Thankfully, the government doesn't approve software. We don't have a software approval board. Can you imagine how terrible it would have been if you'd had to have sent your video game into some government censor before it was allowed to be sold on the market?
Yeah,
that's
there
New
are
Zealand
countries that do that, and that's a pretty terrible. That's a pretty terrible way to organize your media. I mean, I really believe in the Bill of Rights, and I think that we should assert those rights quite prominently. I also know, Ian, that you have some skepticism about the Constitution because it either authorized all of the tyranny that we experience or it was unable to prevent it.
That's correct. I think Lysander Spooner said that, and he said it very well.
Yeah. So, Mark, just going back, though, to the question about
hold
education
on. I just
here.
want to give a real quick fact check here. I did find that email. This is from Menominee, Wisconsin. I said it was from Missouri, and I want to say...
Is that how you pronounce that?
I have no idea how you pronounce it. I'm just saying what I see here. And it is a Walmart warehouse job. Go ahead, Danny, with what you're saying.
Yeah, simply that there are a lot of issues with the reason why education costs so much. Part of it is that we've decided that education is now the place where we entertain a generation of people with sports stadiums and all these really luxurious dormitories and student life centers. It's just a much more comprehensive model of what education is supposed to be. And the number of administrators on the campus has increased like 3 or 4-fold from a generation ago. You're still having the same number of faculty. Many of them are now adjunct faculty. They're not really making much money in higher education.
This is one of the reasons I tell young, if a young person ever calls in, or I'll just sort of make this up as I go, what used to be a real career, college professor, is at this point a joke. I mean, you cannot, it's a part-time job, and it's, it's not great, but it only indicates how, less and less useful the degree is, because now you're being taught by people who are less qualified. In some cases, actually, they're more qualified because they work in the marketplace, and then they come in and they do, evening classes and that kind of thing. But I wouldn't say that that's necessarily the norm. So, yeah, I mean, there's a lot of problems with the way these education people are getting. But when you worked for a community college, am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, I kind of run the gamut. I've taught at private nonprofit institutions. I've taught a little bit at for-profit institutions, and I've taught it at state institutions, public institutions.
So speaking of a community college here, so when the only schooling I've ever really been to is community college and correspondence classes, and they were all pretty reasonably priced. I wouldn't have called them cheap, but at the time, but it wasn't anything I was going to go into debt over. And, the books could have been less costly, but these are core requirements and not that big of a deal. I mean, are community colleges that much cheaper now, or are they driven up in price because their competition is so ridiculously high they can get away with charging more? And if they are higher, why is it? Is it because of administration or what?
I think community colleges are still the most affordable way to get education after high school. But I just want to step back here. Like, why is it that K through 12 education, public schools, can be received by anyone in this country without paying for it on the front end and is paid through taxation? That's a lot because the level of education we needed at that time used to be 5th grade, and then it used to be a high school degree. But you and I both know that we can't find really really competitive, meaningful work with a high school degree without, a significant amount of struggle. As those are the most economically vulnerable people when there is a recession. We know that as well. So,
well, that's me, buddy.
And you guys are certainly outliers in some respects.
Well,
and
Ian's got a very enviable associate's degree.
Okay, very good, very good. So I'm only here to say that if we're going to, for the people that balk at the idea of tuition-free college or debt-free college, whatever you want to call it, free college, it's not free, of course, we know that.
Yep.
But if we're going to say that K through 12 should be something that young people can attain without paying on the front end, then we should be willing to entertain the idea of at least a 2-year college extension of that in a community college setting or a 4-year degree or something of that nature, because the kind of economy that we're competing in now requires additional education. And look, I would say that should be a good thing. Right? We're moving into a society where we use technology to fulfill more and more of our daily tasks. And if it weren't for the fact that our livelihood is connected to earning a paycheck by performing work, the fact that all these jobs are being automated away should be thrilling to us, because most of us don't actually want to do those jobs, but we have found no other way by which people can have a dignified life without them. And so that's something I think needs to change. I'm not here to plug politicians, but I would tell people to look into someone like Andrew Yang, who's talked a lot about universal basic income and a freedom dividend, or some way that we can automate the fact that someone like Jeff Bezos is worth $150 billion. Amazon paid no taxes last year, actually got $130 million rebate in taxes. That's the American people that wrote
Jeff
Amazon
Bezos,
a check.
Oh, okay, so this is standard issue leftist talking points, and it's the
That's right. I actually get a George Soros check every week, and it's fantastic.
I don't believe you get it any more than I get a Coke check.
Okay.
But I mean, but it's standard issue. You'd agree. Jeff Bezos has basically delivered, the services that America has wanted, and of course he should be well rewarded. And no, I don't think he should have had to pay one penny. I'll defend Bezos in this because, the roads existed, but the taxes were paid on those things already. This is the least efficient.
But of course, all of these companies rely on maintained public infrastructure.
Sure.
They rely on a workforce that is healthy, that is literate. They rely on a court system and a police force to defend their property.
To spend on infrastructure if they wanted to, but instead they found the opportunity to go and bomb brown people. Now we're
and I'm not going to defend that either.
$22 trillion
correct.
in debt, and the problem is nobody wants to take responsibility for it. Danny, what's it going to be like when our economy, when the United States government is $40 trillion in debt? What's that going to look like?
I would tell you it depends on what you think about economic theory. It depends on what you think about where the money comes from if it was just printed from ones and zeros to begin with and had no hard backing. Here's the problem, Mark. We have not run this experiment before. We are now a global civilization of over 7 billion people. We're fundamentally altering the planet. The projection for millions of species to go extinct is now on order. And life 100 years from now will look very different, and in usually not very good ways unless we're willing to make a lot of pretty significant changes. And there are still people right now that are worried about transgender people using the bathroom or whether we're going to bomb Iran or,
Those are the kind of things that you can get people whipped up about. What you can't get them whipped up about, for whatever reason, is the sort of the global warming crisis. And I think to some extent that has to do with overselling it by the eco crowd out there, making predictions, those predictions falling wildly short. And, when the time frame comes due, because, we have predictions. And
yeah, well, we thought that for a while, Mark, but then we had a town called Paradise that turned into a living hell. We have entire parts of the country that are flooded beyond measure. We have cities that are wiped out by floods and hurricanes. We have areas that have such droughts that it's altering patterns of immigration where people are fleeing their country because they simply can't grow food there anymore.
Well, that might have something to do with United States foreign policy to some extent, too.
It could have something to do with that. Yeah. These are not unconnected problems.
You won't find me arguing about global warming. Ian has stepped away to use the bathroom, so you might find him arguing it. But I don't. You're not like I'm not that guy. However, I would say that my defense would be is why are we going to take the least efficient, least effective organizational model that the world has ever known, and that apply it to this important, task. Maybe
Well,
science will solve solve the problem with carbon dioxide scrubbers, but the government currently is funding things like methane production through cows and livestock subsidies. They also have subsidies on corn, which is nitrous oxide. So this organization that proposes to solve the problem through carbon dioxide, which may very well be the least of our concern when it comes to greenhouse gases, is the organization you want to put in. They propose to solve it. You want them in charge of solving it. They're never going to do what you want, Danny.
The biggest polluter, the biggest single polluter is the United States military. And we should not be surprised by that, given that they have something like 800 military bases in 70 countries.
Oh, and those aircraft carriers aren't exactly carbon neutral either.
No, they're not. And, we can talk about why we're even willing to go to war over something that we should have kept in the ground to begin with once we knew what was good for us. So you're not going to get any arguments from me on that particular issue. But if you're going to look at something like global warming or global climate change, global climate disruption, we need to be honest about the fact that this is an all-hands-on-deck proposition. We need people in the private sector who are innovating, different types of solar arrays or larger capacity batteries for electrification of the grid and transportation, and we need to be able to allocate public resources to be able to fund some of these innovations and make sure that every house in America has a solar panel on top of it that generates the electricity that's used inside of it, or something of that nature. I'm not an expert on this issue, but I know that we need we need many different solutions working together. So you're not going to hear me say that all of this should be run out of the Bureau of Green Energy or something, and everything has to be stamped by that.
It'll be run out of the Pentagon and out of corporate paid lobbyists.
Well, one of the things I wanted to jump in here, I was out kind of doing a couple things there, and I heard the comment about. I was listening on dlive.lrn.fm to what you guys were talking about. I want to jump back to Bezos real fast. Taxing Bezos, taxing Amazon, taxing these corporations, of course, just means that they pass those taxes on to the buyers. And so the buyers have to bear all of their taxes. Whereas, of course, the people on the sort of the bottom end of the pyramid that you were referring to earlier, Mark, poor people, they get fucked when taxes hit them, because there's nobody they can pass those on to, right? So taxes always hit the poor people the hardest.
Once upon a time, before there was Amazon, there was your local hardware store.
There still is. They're still here in Keene.
Okay, that's great for Keene. A lot of storefronts have been hit really hard by places like Amazon, and while Amazon pays very little or nothing in federal taxes, all of those small businesses used to pay taxes. So we're seeing the kind of debt that we talk about because we're not collecting the revenue that we used to, and we're so enamored with tax.
Hold on, wait. When you say we, you mean the government, right? Because I'm not part of them. But and I heard I heard they are collecting more revenue.
The collective experiment that we're trying to run, whether you want to be a part of it or not.
I definitely don't. But I did hear that they are collecting more revenue under Trump. I don't know if it's true, but that's just what I've heard. So, there's the
annual deficit is increasing under the Trump administration. That is in small part because of spending. That is in large part because of falling revenue collection.
Huh.
Well, what if my concern with Trump is that Bush comes in, the debt's $5 trillion. Obama comes in, the debt is $10 trillion. Trump comes in, the debt is $20 trillion. If Trump gets 8 years, and I don't think there's any guarantee of that, but you presume it is, then at the end of that 8 years, then the debt should be, if you're just looking at the tracking this on a chart, it should be $40 trillion. And this is a deep concern of mine as far as this country goes. I don't think that it can maintain its status as the world's leader, the world's reserve currency, and these sorts of things with that kind of debt. That ultimately that's a terrible pattern to see perpetuated.
Well, let's talk about that, Mark. Who is that debt owed to? Who is the collector of that debt?
In this case, it's large banking organizations, right?
Some of them are international. Some of them are domestic.
Right. I hate using this terminology, international bankers. But, yeah, international bankers, sure.
Yeah, so I mean, ultimately, we need to get serious about what we want our government to do, okay? Because we're not going to not have a government. We can probably agree that there are things we don't want the government to be doing more of, like going to war, like locking up nonviolent people. But there are probably some things we might be able to agree that the government is not doing right now that maybe it should be doing. And so we need to kind of decide what we want our government to do. Okay.
Well, so Danny,
if they're not leaving me alone, they're doing too much.
We know what happens when Democrats get in office.
I know what happens when Republicans get in office. The government gets bigger.
We have Utah, we have Texas to see what happens when Republicans get in office. We have New York State, New Jersey, Illinois. You pick your state. There are blue states out there, states that have not elected a Republican to major office in, they haven't had a majority of Republicans or whatever. You can find these numbers. They're out there. We know what it looks like when Democrats or Republicans are in office. They've already done it. So, it bounces back and forth in Washington,
Well, Mark,
D.C.
how many states are run by libertarians?
0.
And I get that you're probably not even thinking of capital L libertarians here. But to kind of go back to my earlier point, this is a major problem.
So
because,
hold on, Danny. I'd like to argue the fallacy, the logical fallacy of argument from ignorance. We have never seen a libertarian government, so therefore libertarian governments are impossible. We've
seen when they're tried, Mark. We've seen when they're tried, and they never get to the point where we can talk about them at any length, because places like Western Sahara or Somalia don't scale up into wonderful organizations.
Somalia's occupied territory.
If they could just market chlamydia. What I would say
I think you mean cholera, Mark. I think you mean cholera.
Cholera. Damn it. I remember the joke. And
He's just a sales guy. He doesn't know what he's talking about.
Okay.
Damn it. Yeah, I had some kind of rebuttal. Oh, the argument from ignorance.
Chlamydia is curable, which is pretty nice.
Yeah, the argument from ignorance. At one point, we hadn't seen what it was like to not have enslaved black people picking cotton either, but somehow we made it.
We have a caller.
Oh my God!
So
I forgot that we even offered that.
Yeah, we should.
I didn't know this was a call-in show.
We should have mentioned that. I mean,
Danny, I apologize for anything that's said to you.
All right.
Well, it is Turd Ferguson who does, by the way, hold the title of being the one person to run Chris the fucking crying Nazi Cantwell right out of this studio when we had an after show with Chris Cantwell. So Turd Ferguson holds that title. Chris Cantwell fucking booked it out of here as soon as this guy came on the line. So let's see how this goes. Turd Ferguson, you're on with Danny LaDonne on Free.
Yeah, hi guys.
By the way, Danny, can you hear him fine?
Yes, I can.
Okay, great. Go ahead.
Great. Yeah, I appreciate you guys taking my call tonight as well. And I already do not hate this guy nearly as much as I hate Chris Cantwell.
It's easy. Danny's a nice guy.
Yeah, he's totally a nice guy. It's interesting. He said he voted for Harry Brown in 2000, but he sounds like pretty young. Like he's got a youthful voice. I don't know. It's weird.
Yeah, 2000 was my first election. I was the ripe age of 18 and time to vote.
Oh, ripe age of 18, huh? Yep. Great. Good stuff. Well, yeah. I gotta say, man, I disagree with you on some things, and I fact checked you briefly when you talked about the who the biggest polluter in the world is.
Yeah, the U.S. government. I've heard that.
That's the military, isn't
it? He probably got it from us.
I'm pretty sure he's right about that. That's what at least.
I mean, I've seen that statistic many times for many years. They just burn a lot of fuel because they're all over the place moving.
Dude,
all
we've
the
had
time.
military people call to tell us they were just told to throw shit off the side of the fucking aircraft carrier. Like, throw a bunch of fucking Craftsman tools off the side of this aircraft carrier because we need to order some more with the next budget. Seriously, they were doing that shit.
They're running generators in Saudi Arabia or Iraq to stay cool while they have all these military encampments. It is not an efficient system.
Generators to run air conditioners in tents.
We had a Green Beret. Dave, you had him on last. I think it was Green Beret, right?
Yeah, he called it a spending operation, like spend op.
Where what they do is they just fucking load up with thousands upon thousands of rounds of ammunition and just blast them. They just fire and fire and fire and fire, and that's all they do, just so they can order more the next time. So,
well, if the government didn't waste thousands of rounds of ammunition, who would do it, Mark? Who would do it, Ian?
No one's sane because that shit's expensive. So, Turd, what's your point? What were you going to say about that?
Well, yeah, I fact checked it though, but according to Google, China, the country of China, is the world's biggest polluter. So,
meaning the government of China,
or is that everybody in China?
Just everyone in just China collectively is the biggest polluter.
I mean, China has something like 1 billion people. Am I wrong?
I don't know if
it's
I
a
don't
lot
know.
of people, but
I don't think it's.
I don't think that's a fair comparison because you're talking about an organization, the military, versus China, which is just a landmass. So I don't think you can really compare. That's apples to oranges, Turd.
Well, I mean, I don't know. I just fact checked it. I just typed in what the biggest polluter in the world was. That's what
Thanks
Google
for that.
said.
Appreciate the call. All right, so if you do want to call in, we do have the Discord call-in lines. You will sound great, so feel free to join us there. And also, you could call the regular phone number, which is 603-283-6160. Of course, it's there on your screen as well. Oh, and we are monitoring the chat room, so if y'all have a question you want to drop into the Twitch or D-Live chats, Danny, I don't know where we were before Turd called in, so feel free to
we've
pick
kind
up
of
wherever.
been all over the map.
Yeah, we have. It's been fun.
I think we're talking about whether this system or any system like it can be replicated at scale. I know that I brought up in probably one of the debates on my Facebook page that prompted Mark to ask me about this kind of format. I brought up this experiment run down in Chile called Galt's Gulch, and that failed pretty spectacularly.
Sure
and I've heard a little bit about seasteading, and I appreciate the effort that people have put into something like.
Did you hear what happened to those people, the seasteaders?
Yeah,
no.
The government of Thailand put a death sentence on the people who just put basically a floating tent 13 miles out from their country.
They called it. They said, "What did the government say?"
I'm not being hyperbolic here.
No.
They quite literally said.
Well, they didn't catch them, did they?
They didn't. No, but they put.
But they could face the death penalty if they were.
They've said that they've claimed that they are guilty of a crime that the maximum punishment of which is the death penalty.
The crime was like undermining the sovereignty of Thailand.
Some
ridiculous shit's like people camping in the fucking ocean. We're undermining their sovereignty.
So let me circle the wagons here for just a minute. I appreciate some of the more principled and philosophical arguments Ian is making, and I think for a very long time I was attracted to those arguments, and I still think they hold value. At the same time, I'm trying to live in the world that we're actually in and asking what are the best outcomes that we've been able to achieve and what configurations achieve those outcomes. It would seem to me that a mixed market economy that has a combination of regulated private enterprise and public investments in a public sector has produced overall the best outcomes, and they are not perfect outcomes. We are not a perfect species, and we have not yet devised an infinitely utopian society, but it seems better than all the alternatives that we've experimented with, does it not?
If you're comparing all of the, government coercive systems, then yes. But of course, the freedom advocate would say that we haven't really tried freedom, as you've acknowledged, and that
the problem is we don't have a control group, and the libertarians can always run, and liberals can too. Like I gave you an example that here in the United States, surgeries that are elective and must be paid for out of pocket, the quality has gone up and the cost has gone down. What do? You dodge to, hey, when you're talking about running a medical system for a nation, it's the nations that provide socialized medicine. And
I'm disappointed that you regarded that as a dodge, because my point was only Mark, that those things are fine in isolation, but you haven't been able to scale them up to the entire society in a way that appears okay.
Right. The problem is, the reason I can't is because the massa keep on telling me I'm owned, right? Like they keep there's no way to try real freedom while
I've told the judges I've opted out, and they just don't care.
A monopoly organization continues to tell me I must abide by their systems. And
you were both highly influential and well thought out and well spoken advocates for your position, but you were outliers on this point, because if you ask most people what they want, and you say, well, why don't we just take away Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and you can keep a little bit more of your paycheck and fend for yourself, most people don't actually want that, and most other countries don't want the system of healthcare the United States has or aspire to have. They like their system much better and want more public
I think that's probably true. People get the government they deserve.
Yeah, and those people have no right to tell me that I must invest in their really crappy retirement system, or what did you say, medicine, or that I must take the lowest common denominator medical system. And this is the thing that will never be addressed when it comes to medicine, is once we have the world's largest economy, medical economy socialized, then will medical innovation crawl to a stop? Will intellectual property laws and socialized medicine stifle what we hope to see is human longevity spring forward in the next 20 years? Maybe it won't.
Intellectual property laws are definitely stifling innovation. I mean, there's no doubt that's what they were designed to do.
Tends to drive towards the mean and tends to drag down the mean. Is that what we want in medicine?
Well, I think, again, if you look at countries by their average healthcare outcomes or the average dollar paid for the services rendered, the United States is by far the most expensive system.
Yes.
We're paying more for the same drugs that other people in other countries get for much less.
The other
right?
countries are basically offloading their innovation costs on the United States market, which is still the largest. I mean, in part.
Maybe, Mark, but if you see what the average healthcare or pharmaceutical CEO or executives make in a year, and then you look at the system they've created, that frankly the incentives are not aligned.
If you took every one of their paychecks,
they make money by denying care. They make money by keeping people sick. They're not actually
so
interested
will the government.
in people.
The government will be incentivized to kill off people who are no longer working and paying taxes, and there'll be all kinds of misaligned incentives. If you took every CEO's paycheck and every medical field out there, and you took it away, and then you applied it to the medical costs, you'd probably see a drop of $1 in everybody's paycheck.
You're saying probably, Mark, but let's actually run this experiment. Let's look at other countries that have socialized or universal health care. Look at their life expectancy. I mean, does Japan have death panels? Does Sweden have death panels?
Yes, they do.
They have to.
I'll tell you, the UK certainly does. We've read stories on multiple occasions. And every government that has to determine, because a resource is scarce, you must you have to allocate that resource. So you have to determine on what criteria are you going to allocate that resource. And it could be cost.
What we know is that the average person consumes at least 50% of their overall medical expenditures in the last 6 months of their life.
Yeah.
We know that dying is the most expensive part of your entire life.
Yes.
So I'm going to concede to you that there probably are situations in which you look, a family member in the eye and say, you're probably going to get 2 to 3 more weeks of life with this person with this really expensive treatment, but is this really the quality of life that this person wants to be having?
Have you ever heard of any of these stories out of the UK with them
I'm
deciding
familiar
to kill
with the
the babies
that was non-viable, and there was a lot of debate about
where they wouldn't
whether
even
they
let
could
them
resuscitate
leave.
it.
The craziest thing was they wouldn't let them leave to take their own child to Italy, where
for another socialized system.
Wasn't the Pope or something going to donate money to?
No, it was like the Prime Minister of Italy.
Yeah, somebody was going to donate to have this whatever experimental treatment done, and the government said no. Not because, they couldn't let the child go. They certainly could, but because it's all about authority. It's all about, we said you can't do this, and we're in charge of you. So, that's fucked
Ian,
up.
I will say that is a really powerful anecdote for that particular argument.
Yeah.
Well, here's another one. There are many people in the United States who commit some low-level criminal offense or just walk into a bank and declare that they're robbing it so that they can be incarcerated to then get the health care that they weren't able to get
I bet they're
on the
disappointed.
outside.
Because the healthcare system in prison in the United States sucks.
It's socialist, right?
Well,
They'd be a lot better off driving across the border to Canada and saying, "Hey, I'm
none
indigent."
at all.
Go ahead.
I mean, I get it. I get it that the prison system probably doesn't have the best health care one could get in America, but it's better health care that you can get if you can afford no health care.
A bus ticket to a Greyhound ticket to Canada is cheaper than whatever you put in there. I recommend
it might be. And the individual that I'm citing probably was not engaged in some kind of higher-level rational thinking about medical tourism to other countries.
Well, some people will commit a crime just so they can get a 3 hots and a cot during the wintertime. They'll go to jail for that reason.
It's totally rational. And so when we look at why people are in jail, they're in for a range of reasons ranging from mental health to, socioeconomic problems to a variety of issues that have nothing to do with harming individuals or their property, but for these kinds of problems.
So, Danny, I think you've done a fine job.
I would only say on that last point that if we're going to say that the solution to that is to privatize the prison industry to make more profit off of these kinds of problems, I would say that's crazy.
No, nobody here said that.
I don't have the best solutions for privatization when it comes to prison. I mean, I could I've seen some interesting works.
Like I said, I'm against privatization.
in fiction.
The best thing you can do is let people out who've never harmed anybody, like the drug users and the drug dealers and the people, prostitutes and all that, and stop enforcing these insane wars.
Yeah,
on
the best thing I
prohibitions.
can do is say that you'd probably cut down on crime by somewhere in the neighborhood of 75 to 90% if you stopped incarcerating people for victimless crimes, at least ones that weren't habitualized in that capacity, and let out drug users and people, all that kind of stuff. I think you'd see a tremendous drop in crime. But this is the best I can do. Privatization
just brings cronyism and huge problems with corporate.
You may not like the term privatization, but I don't know if there's a good free market solution for locking people who are, dangerous. That's
one of those tough, issues for a lot of libertarians is trying to say, what would happen in the absence of a coercive state with a so-called justice system that everybody knows is shit. Everybody knows the fucking justice system is garbage if you've ever actually been involved in it, whether it's as a civil case or as a criminal case. It sucks.
Hopefully Danny can fix that a little bit.
Well, I would only add here that I think libertarianism is most attractive when we apply it to a group of capable, responsible, self-sufficient people.
Yep.
And if everyone were capable, responsible, and self-sufficient, we wouldn't need government for very much, if anything at all. Unfortunately, that's not the world we've lived in or ever will live in, and I would argue that government is not something that was imposed upon us, but rather that often just that basic framework of social organization is what people of all societies around the world are compelled to create at any scale so that they can manage their kind of tribal affairs.
Well, what you see is places like England is the richest people there are moving to the islands of Guernsey and Jersey and things like that. What I think is going to happen in the United States, as I inevitably believe that these philosophies will take hold because
which philosophies?
Basically, statism, general statism, because Republicans don't stand against it hard enough, and mostly
they believe in it.
What's that? Yeah, they believe in it. And mostly they're just talking about abortion and women and people using the wrong bathrooms and stuff like that, right? Like that's where their talking points are all on the social sphere where they can,
whip people up. They want to whip up people.
State force in the directions they want to. I think these things are inevitable, but I also think it's inevitable that, people are going to leave the U.S. and then you're going to have your big earners that, as a percentage. The top 10% of earners pay the vast majority of income tax, and that top 10% of them pay an incredible amount. If you lose those huge earners, then you got nothing left.
Yeah, this is actually a discussion that we had on my Facebook page, Mark, because we did talk about the matter of.
God, I'm glad we're having it here because nobody pays attention to Facebook.
Well, and then I'm taking on 9 leftists at once and getting called names and all kinds of other dumb shit.
Well, here you can actually have a conversation, and we've been having a good one here.
I'm thrilled to be on your program for that reason. I think this is much more an engaging format.
This has really been interesting,
Mark,
I have to say.
I would say, Mark, looking at this issue, there are a small number of people who may be paying a significant amount in taxes, but we've also seen a great number of examples where they don't, where they have a lot of lawyers and accountants, and they lobby for the kinds of loopholes that make them pay a much lower.
Guess who write the laws?
Right. Well, here you are,
fucking attorneys.
Here you are wishing that the government was, a good organization full of honest people again. And I'm going to have to tell you, Danny, it isn't going to happen no matter what.
Right.
Once you get your
I guarantee you, anybody who gets elected to the government is probably not an honest person, and if they were when they got there, they'd probably be corrupted.
So those are 2 facts, Danny, and you can look them up because I know you shouldn't take anything that I say as fact. 2 facts is A, the corrupt seek power, and B, those that achieve power tend to become corrupted. So not only does power corrupt, but corrupt seek power. And what's going to happen is when you somehow, get this magic, future organizational model that you're looking for, the corrupt are going to seek power in it.
It's going to be run by assholes.
Yeah, it's going to be run by assholes, and they're going to rip you off because that's what they do.
I think, first of all, we can concede that within each of us there are probably some better and lesser angels. I can also say that sure, there are people, dare I say Donald Trump is one of them, who seek power because they have authoritarian, autocratic, or demagogic impulses. I concede that. There are also a great number of people who really do get involved in their, on their school board or on their city council or, in some other level of government because they really believe in creating a great community. I am not willing to paint every police officer or every politician with the same brush.
I won't do that either, but here's what
I'll
I'll tell you is that if you're a good person who wants to do what's right by your neighbor in politics, you will likely find very quickly at low levels that you have almost no effect, and that in order to be able to rise to the top and in order to make money and survive, you need to use the information, at the very least the privileged information that you get in order to invest or these sorts of things, and then perhaps a couple of sweetheart deals, and then it's off to the races. I mean,
well, let's just say,
look, we've even seen the libertarians corrupted here in New Hampshire.
Happens all the time.
You had asked earlier if there was a libertarian state, and Mark's answer is true. There isn't. However, the libertarians have been elected here in New Hampshire by numbers that the other libertarians elsewhere would be very envious of if they knew about it. But they're running as Republicans and Democrats. And many of those libertarians who are, when we knew them, very principled, good liberty people, some of them have completely gone to the fucking dark side and joined the state, and it is insane, but that's just the nature of power. Even the libertarians can't resist. I mean, Ron Paul is one of the few that you could even point to say, yeah, he managed to resist it, but it's pretty rare that...
Well, he still did earmarks. He just didn't vote for his own earmarks because he understood that among 435 people that a vote is basically inconsequential. So therefore, when you go out
but
and
it was symbolic, and that made a difference, and that's why he was called Dr. No. But anyway, I just wanted to give you the example.
Here's what I will say. I think libertarians with a lowercase l and progressives can both suffer from these almost impossible purity tests whereby no candidate meets their standard for incorruptibility because we live in a complicated world.
Clearly, Christians who voted for Trump do not suffer from this shit.
Well, in many cases, one vote or the other is always going to, for instance, the school board in Keene, you cannot refuse to vote on a thing. And in many cases, that's just one of the rules. And so in many cases, when a vote comes up, the vote either way is going to increase the size of government. So you've put yourself in this situation that forces somebody to vote for more government. They can't avoid it unless they resign from the position. So there are some very awkward positions that people are put into that sort of force them to go against their principles, and that's one of the frustrating things I think about politics and compromise and all that. But to be clear,
so let me just go back for just a second, because Mark talked about power and the goal to seek power and the corrupting influence of power.
Yes.
There's always going to be some measure of power in our society. And the best that we've come up with for a solution to that problem is to distribute that power as widely as possible, because when that power is consolidated, bad things tend to happen. So I would support a system that makes that power as widely distributed as possible.
So you would agree with secession then?
So here's what I would say about secession. If you're not going to have people unwillingly participating in a society if they don't want to. If an area of the country wants to secede, my hot take is the United States should probably be divided into about 6 regional countries.
At least.
Because it is ungovernable in its current configuration.
And that actually advances the idea that you're talking about of decentralizing power, bringing decision-making closer to the local level. I mean, I would say 6 is a minimum. It should be probably more than that. And that way the people in Texas and Utah can have their red state, and the people in California and Washington and Oregon can have their blue state, and let the experiments begin.
I think
here's the thing about secession, and this is a two-pronged answer I want to give. First of all, I love the idea in some federalist conception of the United States where every state is indeed its own laboratory of innovation, and we can see what works or doesn't work in a particular state and adopt that. But the rule is, if you see that things really suck for a long time in a particular state, you have to concede that that is a bad model. So when a state like Kansas runs this experiment where they engage in trickle-down economics and believe that by cutting taxes on everyone, it's just going to create more jobs, that experiment under the Brownback administration failed miserably, and the idea that Republicans then wanted to replicate that on a national level in 2016 and beyond is a terrible idea.
I have
the other thing I would say,
read into that as best I
thing.
can, and I cannot I just cannot discern what the problems were. But at the same time, I just throw back Detroit in your face and say, hey, look, socialism's working real good over there. Go ahead.
I don't think Detroit is a model for socialism. I think what
they
happened
certainly thought
in a
they
place,
were at one point.
Well, I think we could talk about
These are
the
just
auto
models for
industry in
statism.
Detroit
That's
and
all these
why
are.
Detroit's manufacturing sector went away when that was its principal economic output. But let me just say, going back a minute now, that the only way that those laboratories of innovation, whether we're calling them states or countries, work is if we have immigration laws that allow people to enter and leave freely. And I think good libertarians get that issue, and it frustrates me when people call themselves libertarian, but they want a police state at the border. I don't get
totally
that.
Frustrates the shit out of me. Those people do not understand freedom.
Yeah, I'm not going to take the time to explain why I agree, but I agree. Danny,
we have the fun role of being the libertarians who totally get immigration and freedom, and being on national radio where both the fucking Republicans and the Democrats listening cannot comprehend it.
Well, we're on both liberal and conservative stations.
We are.
As many liberal stations as there are left. And we're basically the only live content out there for them from which they can choose that is less distasteful than the Republicans.
Yeah,
and
we're carried on a bunch of progressive talkers.
That's the reason that we tend to be there, and we get it from all sides, especially on the immigration issue. Danny, I'm going to...
This has been good.
Attempt to wrap this up by giving you the opportunity of... I'm going to ask the final question. Danny, could you just give me a short, soliloquy on why it is that you turned away from the most moral and just belief system in the world to the obvious godless commie crap you believe now? By the way... many of the things you've stated here sound to me like I would describe you as a consequentialist left libertarian. I would not pull the title from you. I know Ian will. Go ahead.
He said he's against violence earlier, so hey, I'm on board with that.
Yeah, I like that description, Mark. If I can get that on a T-shirt, I would wear that. That's fine.
Well, that'll make you popular with the ladies.
Yeah, I'm sure. So as long as they have strong reading glasses to get all of those words on a T-shirt. I'm not a big guy, so it would be small print. Okay, look, I think that libertarian ideas are attractive, and I see a lot of people go through at least a phase whereby they see the value of those ideas, and we've talked about that extensively. There are also plenty of problems with government, all right? We've talked about things like waste, fraud, abuse, coercion, violence. Those are issues that we need to deal with. But the reality is government is not going away. We're going to have some form of government next year and, 10 years from now, et cetera. We should be willing to engage in a discussion not merely about big or small government, but what we want our government to do. What do we want our government to do for us? What are we going to invest in so that we can have the kind of future that's desirable? And there are probably many areas of government that progressives and libertarians can agree we should be defunding. And I think the remaining questions are, what do we do to further the outcomes that we all agree we want, which are like smart, healthy people living dignified, meaningful lives.
Now, Ian, I want to let his statement stand.
I have another question that has nothing to do with politics, Mark.
I'm wondering at this point, by letting the statement stand, have we now endorsed leftism? Because the people out there
we spent an hour and a half talking about these.
The people out there that hated on us for letting Cantwell hated on you specifically for letting Cantwell on the air. Here I've brought on a leftist to talk about his stuff, and I've given him the final word.
Well, fine.
Ask your
let people think what they want to think.
Yeah, screw those people.
Yeah, fuck the haters. I don't give a shit. Anyway, Danny, thanks for coming on with us. You mentioned that you're working on being an attorney. That's something that you're focusing on in life. Of course, you've been a talented...
I'm going to law school. I'm not confident that I will yet be a practicing attorney, but the law is an area that I want to focus on, for sure.
Right on. We actually have a co-host on Monday nights, Melanie, who went to law school and is not an attorney. She's doing other things.
We have another co-host who went to law school and is an attorney.
Yeah, we do, as a matter of fact.
Does Laurel still count as a co-host?
She hasn't been on recently. She's taken a break. But anyway, so what I wanted to ask you about was you're obviously, we refer to you lovingly as the producer of Playing Columbine, the movie that you had us in for part of an interview. Are you still doing media production? And if so, is there a project that you want to promote tonight?
I mean, people are welcome to visit my website, emberwildproductions.com, or just Google me, Danny Ladoni. I'm easy to find. I really enjoy, at this point, guiding other people on their own media production goals. So I'm offering an opportunity for people to learn about podcasting and create their own podcast. I think it's a great format, and I think formats like this are excellent for the same reason. So, thank you guys for having me on, and I hope I've thrown some arguments your way that give people, some pause and some things to think about, and I hope we can continue conversations like this.
I was on the oracleofbacon.org .org.com site.
What is this?
This is the site that definitive site that determines whether or not you are within degrees of Kevin Bacon.
Okay.
And they have taken away the documentary click box, which was the one by which I became 3. It always had 3, although at one point it showed 2 degrees to Kevin Bacon. And I can't remember, who it was. I think it might have been through, what was the guy's name that hung up on us?
I don't know.
Look, we just talked
you're talking about Jack Thompson.
Jack Thompson. Yeah, Jack,
yeah,
I think it was through
disbarred attorney who wanted to censor video games and police the industry.
Yeah, I think it was actually through him. But now I guess since the Oracle of Bacon doesn't say it anymore, I guess I'm no longer 2 degrees.
So you lost a degree?
I've lost it. I've lost it.
Yeah, and I've fallen from grace in a similar manner, Mark, so don't feel too bad.
Yeah.
Look, I would only say, I thought of this just now, I have been a plaintiff in 2 lawsuits, and both of those times I was suing the government. So I will leave that as my claim to fame. I certainly think that we need very vigorous and vigilant citizens to challenge government power. Government, without question, is the chief source of power in our society. They have a monopoly on violence, and for that reason, we should be extra judicious about, calling them out and being willing to stand up to and question their decisions when necessary.
Totally agree. Danny
Thank you.
Ladoni, thank you for joining us here on Freer Talk Live. Have a great night.
It's a pleasure. Take care.
Sir. Check him out. It's Ledonne. That's Danny Ladoni. Anything else you want to share tonight, Mark, on our Freer Talk Live after show?
No, I'm just kind of trying to think now. I think this was highly successsul.
Yeah, he's great.
Probably
smart guy.
In large part to the fact that Danny's good at this and not scared of a mic. And I think that's one of the reasons that you
just like Chris Cantwell.
You're accused of being a panderer to Cantwell is that you understand that the guy is good on the air.
Mm-hmm.
He can deliver a great show. Yep. And
I wish we didn't have to ban him from Free Talk Live.
Yeah, well, that whatever. It's I believe he made the decisions he made for the purpose of being of raising funds. I don't think
It didn't end up working out for him in the long run, though.
Well, it worked out for him in the short run, and that's all he's ever thought about. So I don't know what he's going to do to – maybe he should just change his name and go get a real job. But at this point, Christopher Cantwell is forever the crying Nazi.
Right.
John Smith, maybe he can get away with being doing some computer job otherwise. But I'm just wondering to myself, would people like to see this as a series where we hunt down people who – used to be libertarians and find out, why aren't you a libertarian anymore? And just talk to them.
See if you can get Amanda Bolden.
I don't think
she won't talk to me.
I can't imagine Amanda Bolden will come on a show with you.
No way. She's a coward.
Well, I can't imagine she would.
Yeah.
But
for listeners that don't know, that's the one of the Free Staters that fell from Liberty. She used to run the Shire Sharing organization. We interviewed her a number of times from pork fests and things like that about Shire Sharing, and now she's a total leftist.
I used to think that
speaking out against libertarians.
I used to think the ideas of liberty were so convincing that we just never lost anybody. But
oh wow, you just weren't paying attention, huh? We've lost people all along the way.
I'm not.
Will May, free keen blogger.
He'd be a great one to interview, wouldn't he?
I really don't. I already know what these people think. So I mean, if it's something you want to do, that's cool, man. You can do it.
We don't do this show for you. We do the show for listeners.
Oh no, I do the show for me.
Well,
sorry to say, as soon as it's boring to me, I'm fucking done.
Well, I can already tell you that I generally know the answers that people are going to give when they talk about leaving the ideas of liberty. I understand. I knew what Danny was going to say before he said it.
I didn't know.
Well, all right. I'm glad that you've now been educated. I think this might be worth a series to, because I think it was entertaining. If you think so too, find some way to communicate that to me. One of those ways would be really awesome to communicate it to us is by joining the AMP program at
that'd be cool.
amp.freetalklive.com.
Thank you to the amplifiers for helping us get to 200 radio affiliates, and I think it's like 205, but we're going to lose the one that I haven't removed from the list yet, so like we're at 204, 205,
and
that range.
What I think about the AMP program is that having been an amplifier, being an amplifier, allows one so much more voice in what we do and what we talk about.
You're in the inner circle.
You really are. And, you know, I mean, the worst way to get...
Although we rejected Jackie's amp. Remember that?
Yes, we did. Well, that's because she just wanted to go in there.
She wanted to troll.
Raise hell in the amplifier group. So we gave her $5 back. No, you're not going to do that.
And we did take mouth-breathing dullards for a while.
Yeah, the amplifiers wanted to have him. Pardon me for the cough.
Yeah.
It's not very professional.
It's all right. It's the internet show.
Yeah, fuck him. So mouth-breathing dullard, James Whittakind, did pay money to troll the AMP group. He thought somehow he was going to convince people because, by God, Mark Edge said something about the Pentagon and 9/11 or some crap.
I was actually glad to hear him call in tonight because I was worried about him. He hadn't gone into the toxic user zone. I was looking the other night. It had been quite a long time since he'd posted.
That's because the toxic user zone is now coming to him. So they have created their own Discord group, the fans of James.
Oh, is that right?
And they now send him messages on his Discord, and you can actually voice call. They can voice call him on his phone, and a whole variety of things are being done. And every single time he communicates with him, he threatens my 11-year-old son's life and well-being. I can't wait to see Jackie Edgington suffer.
Yeah, he's got to have a macro for it because he drops it into where he's typing so often, and it's always in the same caps. It's all caps and
fucking nut.
Yeah, but anyway, my point is he hasn't been in the toxic user zone in quite a long time, and so
at some point that stress is going to cause him to have a heart attack or a stroke.
I was worried he might have been in the hospital or he might have been arrested again for another DUI. You never know what's going to happen.
He was never arrested as many times as you said, you liar, so-called
By the way, he's not banned from Freer Talk Live. If he were to call in to Freer Talk Live, he would be able to get on the air.
I would probably not talk to him. I cannot brook the notion of speaking to a person that threatens my child.
Although I think Michael Hampton might have actually banned him from the phone line, so he would have to call on Discord, and I don't think he's actually allowed in the call-in lines anymore. So maybe he's fucked and he can't call in to these after
he's
shows.
made every effort to call my phone, send me every way to communicate with me. This guy has done it. He's a fucking
got nothing
lunatic.
better to do. So it has been Freer Talk Live. Thank you for
2 extra hours here, people.
Turd Ferguson calling in tonight.
If you appreciate this, consider going to the AMP group at amp.freetalklive.com and showing your appreciation.
Yeah, that'd be cool.
I kind of feel like if you've been
$5
listening for many, many months and consuming the media
boy, Mark's going to get entitled here. The entitled conservative.
I'm not entitled. I believe that from a standpoint of integrity, that if you consume this media...
Are you going to start turning down $2 donations next?
I would never do so.
Okay.
That's you're referring to Stefan Molyneux, who paid his taxes and found a $2 donation to be too annoying.
No, it's happened more than once too. He's had a couple of low, monetary donations that Vincent found some of the clips and played it on Questioning Authority, and it's just, oh my god.
Vincent is a brilliant little new broadcaster. I think he's awesome. No, I do feel like from an integrity standpoint that a person who is consuming media day in and day out, a particular type, should support that media. If you're like all the podcasts that you listen to regularly and you like, I mean, I can't imagine why you listen regularly and you don't like it, but I guess I'm not
Some people don't like to, they don't like the opinions, but they still like to be challenged, or they like to hear differing viewpoints.
I think if you are listening regularly to a podcast, regardless of what that podcast is, that you should be supporting that podcast. And if you choose not to do that, you are demonstrating a lack of integrity by my standard.
We also have the Patreon, which helps support the LRN satellite channels, and that's $2 a month. Yep. So you could do that if you're, you're strapped for cash. If $5 a month for AMP is too much, you can do $2 a month. Go to patreon.lrn.fm, which is one of the ways I do it, Mark. There's a video game show on YouTube, Pat the NES Punk.
Uh-huh.
He is my contemporary. He does a show with a guy named Ian, actually, who runs a video game store in California. And so it's fun. The Ian guy's got all these like customer experiences where he talks about like, you know, what it's like running a video game store in 2019.
Right.
And so they've got some really interesting stories and opinions on gaming, and I contribute to their Patreon.
So I got a friend, Anthony, on Facebook, and I've met him in real life. He's a nice kid. He's, I believe, largely unemployed and perhaps I don't know that much about him and wouldn't propose to know that much about him, but I think he's disabled in some way. I don't really know precisely what it is, and I haven't spent any time thinking about it. You know, and I hope the best for him or whatever. But, you know, if you're in a condition like that kid, well, okay, maybe you could share Free Talk Lives on your Facebook, or, you know, promote us in some way or another. You could show your support in different manners than coming up off of $5 a month. I don't know. If $5 a month is a lot of money to you, then I'm not talking to you. But if you're spending $5 on a mocha frappo, whatever, right? You know, like, you know, if we're talking about you getting one less drink, alcoholic beverage out at the bar and drinking one more alcoholic beverage at home. I'm not even talking about you getting fewer alcoholic beverages.
Right.
I'm simply talking about you like changing the location
Your habit.
that you purchase that alcoholic beverage. If that's you, then, and by the way, I believe that to be the vast majority of Americans.
Turd Ferguson asks if Mark is simulcasting the show and paying server fees enough, because he doesn't give to AMP, but he simulcasts us on his internet network.
It depends on how many listeners you have, but I thank you for that. And Turd, if you're working, I'd like to encourage you to, you know, hey, join the AMP program, and that way you get to be part of the conversation that goes on in the AMP group on Facebook, and I know you would have an awesome time
Facebook.
there. He would.
Facebook's yuck.
Yes, but he's a really good poster
in
Turd
Ferguson?
the Discord, and I'd like to see him in that Facebook group if he uses Facebook.
Turd, he wants you to get on Facebook. I don't know if you actually are on
If
Facebook.
he's not on Facebook, I do not want anybody.
No? Okay, don't join Facebook. It's bad.
Facebook's
bad.
Using Facebook.
No, I'll give it to you. The AMP group was the last thing that held me onto Facebook.
Right.
That was my final excuse. So, well, I got to be here for the AMP group. And I'm like, eventually I'm like, nah.
Right.
Fuck it. If they want to reach me, they can reach me on Discord. They can reach me. We had a special AMP area there and blah, blah, blah.
Right.
And if they wanted to, we could do it on the forum too. If like there were actually people using the forum and the amplifier said, we need our own area, I'd make an AMP group on the forum, but nobody uses the forum.
If you're currently taking prescription opioid drugs, I would encourage you to purchase the generics. If, however, you are not taking prescription opioid drugs, I would not encourage you to take them unless...
Fair enough. So you're saying Facebook is a drug.
Yeah, Facebook's a mess.
Yeah.
And the only reason I'm on there is that I think that there's some value to Free Talk Live to being on Facebook. And
I don't know if there is.
Well, I raised a lot of the money for the hope.freetalklive.com charity.
Okay.
And I mean,
local businesses say they get business when they put an ad on Facebook. They say it.
Facebook.
I don't disbelieve them.
Yeah. I mean, I don't recommend getting on Facebook, but I will say that I don't think that it's worth me giving up.
Some people buy shit on the Facebook marketplace, and they seem to get good deals there.
Yeah. I will also
Jay
say
Noon gets firewood or whatever.
Yeah. I'll also say this about you know, the Facebook stuff is, man, I can't believe it. As a professional broadcaster, I lost my train of thought.
It happens. It's midnight.
It never happens to me.
It's been 5 hours,
Yeah,
man. You've been on the air. You're exhausted.
I probably am. I keep on going.
You can have some wine if you want to keep going.
Oh, that's a great idea. I've already used, you know, words that I would, you know, I'm ashamed of having used. And you want to give me some wine? Tell these people what I really think? Dear God.
Oh, it would be fun to get Daniel Ladonna in the studio with Chris Cantwell.
Who would do that?
Chris would.
Chris would get. Yeah, Chris is, you know, he's some kind of weird prima donna, you know, attention whore.
Yeah.
I mean, that's not an argument. I mean, I heard the best one was when Rich Paul, you know, had.
Dude, that was great.
Yeah, Rich Paul was awesome.
It was Chris's best performance on the air, and Rich Paul fucking nailed him, and Rich Paul just batted him back.
He's
one
so
after
good at this.
the other.
I mean, it's like the only job he can do.
Who, Rich Paul?
Yeah.
He is good at it, no doubt about it. I'm going to have him on Tuesday night.
jab at him here.
Johnson is going to be out, so Rich will be on Tuesday. Man, when Rich is on a roll, he's killing it.
Rich has a lot of the advantages that Cantwell had back when we had him on. One thing that people need to understand.
He's local.
Yeah, well, that's an important advantage.
He's good.
Right now we have several hosts, and Free Talk Live really hasn't had this in history, in the history of Free Talk Live. Several highly talented local hosts, and I'm not, certainly trying to disparage any people from, the past or anything, but, I hated to keep on drawing on that same one host that I found to be powerful. And Cantwell, at one point, was that guy.
He was.
He was a principled libertarian who lived in Keene, New Hampshire.
Good sense of humor.
Was good on the air.
Like to be here.
And,
he even helped behind the scenes. He was doing some, archive work for us during, like, Porkfest or whatever.
Sorry, not sorry. The guy was good on the air. And then when he, he turned the corner and attempted to, milk the alt-right for money and continue to get it, well, you find out how that works.
Now he's got to pay an attorney. Hoju says, feed Mark a Coke drink and let him say bitch-ass motherfucker.
The MIDI of that is much better than me.
For a moment there, I thought he might have meant a alcoholic Coke drink, but then I just realized he means just Coke because of the caffeine thing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That in that circumstance, I was not caffeinated. I just was irritated.
Were you not? Okay.
No. People. There's a conspiracy meme out there that has the Coke circled in the background.
Really?
But it was a caffeine-free Coke.
That still has a little bit of caffeine in it.
Not much.
No.
I came unglued because I was so sick of you painting me as this fucking statist. Whenever you get a goddamn
you were sick of me
opportunity.
turning your microphone off. That's why you blew up.
Oh, I hated that. I hate that. I mean, look, man, I've worked hard to be the partner on this show, and you will treat me like a fucking partner, and you will leave my microphone on and give me an opportunity to speak.
Oh, you're tempting me right now.
You're gonna have to turn the microphone off when we leave.
I'm gonna turn the whole stream off. How do you feel about that?
I'm ready to go home. Thank you, everybody.
Bye. Good night.
Jeff Staub here, and everyone has a boss. And my boss said no way to 150% of Kelly Blue Book in May.
Jeff, no way.
This is what I think of that. Kia Crazy 2019 continues. Kia Crazy, it's back. For May, get 150% of Kelly Blue Book value for your trade-in when you purchase or lease a new Kia from York Kia. Hurry in and see me at my desk on the showroom floor. I might not be here in June.
You are crazy.
York!